Welcome back to Squawk Box. On Friday, the government rolled out its new $350 billion small business relief program. We're already hearing about thousands of applications and billions of dollars in committed aid, but we've also got word this weekend of some pretty significant hiccups with the program. Joining us right now is Senator Marco Rubio, chairman of the Senate Committee on Small Business and Entrepreneurship, and we thank him for joining us. Senator, good morning to you. We've heard both about a lot of applications going in on the good side, but we've also heard about a number of hiccups and more. And so I'd start with this. In terms of where we are on the program itself, how would you grade the program as is, given the feedback that you're hearing from small businesses around the country?
Well, as is, it can't be sustained. I mean, this is not the program we designed, but that's not the point. I think it's important to remember, though it was passed a week here ago Friday, SBA and Treasury then had 7 days literally to sort of try to stand it up and get it moving. So you're talking about something here that is $350 billion, has no precedent, has never been done before, and you've got to create this massive program and its rules in 6 days and launch it. So anytime you do it that way, of course, you're going to have some issues, but we had no choice. This is an emergency situation. And when you do things in an emergency situation, they're going to be far less than perfect. That said, I do believe it will now improve every single day for a number of reasons. The first, Treasury had to rewrite all the rules that SBA put out because they were way too confusing and did not reflect in any way the law that we wrote. And so they didn't issue that till Thursday night. So a lot of banks had just gotten it and they didn't have the forms. There's still some confusion. And there are some issues that have emerged in terms of questions that are unanswered that will begin to get answered. And the other is capacity. You know, the SBA has been working through the weekend with Amazon to improve the system that bankers use to interface with it. And so hopefully those improvements will make a difference today. And I think hopefully what we want to see is that the number of lenders in the system grows every day and the number of problems and issues with the program diminishes every single day. So it will get better. It has to get better.
Senator, you just said there are some questions that need to be answered and that they will be answered. What are those questions in your mind?
Well, a couple things. Number one is so there's a requirement that they hold these loans for seven weeks on the books before they can sell them. So it's important for the Fed to come forward with a facility that they're going to have in place for those banks and lenders that want to sell back to the Fed or to the secondary market. So clarity on that is important. There were additional guidance issued on Friday that I think answer a lot of questions about eligibility, especially by the 501c3s. There are some remaining questions about eligibility in terms of, for example, payroll costs. When you calculate payroll, does that include the employer obligations under payroll tax and FICA? That was the intent of the bill. The rules are unclear. So again, the bankers and the lenders don't know how to calculate that. Questions like that need to be answered. And as they emerge, if SBA and Treasury can issue quick guidance and make that information known widespread, it begins to improve.
Senator, perhaps the singular question I get from small businesses I will ask to you, and I've asked it on this program to others before, which is, what do you tell the small business owner who says, you know what, I don't know if I should take this loan. I don't know if I should keep my employees on the payroll, because as I look at this crisis and it rolling across the country and the spread of it, I'm not sure if I have a liquidity crisis or I actually will have a solvency crisis, meaning I think if this were to go on a month, maybe I'd be okay. But if this goes on 2 or 3 months and I can't really reopen, I won't be okay, and therefore I shouldn't be taking the loan. What do you tell that person?
Well, I could tell them that in many ways the whole country's in the same boat, right? I mean, no one knows when things are going to get back to a semblance of normal. I think the day will come where things will begin to reopen, but we're going to have to keep the social distance guidelines and the masks and things of that nature in place. I believe that that's probably going to happen regionally, some areas before others. And but no one knows. We are truly an uncharted territory. But we've never been here before. No one's ever been here before, and so it's difficult to predict, how this ends, when it ends, and how long it's going to take to get there. And I sympathize with those feelings. I really do. And all we tried to do with this bill is say, this was a 6, 8, or 12-week event. What could we do to keep the employee attached to the employer and give you the best chance possible to restart even when that moment comes? But that amount of uncertainty, believe me, it's the thing everyone's grappling with right now on everything from business to government to our personal lives. And I sympathize with it. And I think ultimately we all want that answer. And I guess the best answer I can give is it kind of depends on us, on how good we are as a people in flattening that curve on the infection rate, and while government and others help build the capacity of our healthcare system.
Hey, Senator, we've had a number of guests on this morning and a report from Diana Olick talking about the mortgage market, how that's in real trouble at this point because there are so many people looking for forbearance that it's put a lot of pressure on the mortgage servicers. You can say the same thing in real estate industries when you have small businesses and others saying, wait, I need to not pay the rent for this month, or let's say tenants who say I can't pay my rent for this month either, just even in a person. And it kind of moves up the line. Who should be responsible for paying some of these things? The mortgage servicers on one hand, the real estate, the REITs on another hand. Yeah. Is there going to be a big backstop that eventually takes care of all of this, the buck getting kind of passed up the chain of command? What do you think?
Well, I mean, the first thing is the Fed did announce a few weeks ago that they were going to create some sort of facility to help clear some of this off the books so we wouldn't have this issue with lenders and those who hold those mortgages. But that won't be enough. Look, there's contagion here now, just like there is on the virus. On the economic side, you've hit a point that's critical. It's one of the reasons why I don't claim it's enough, but it's why we made it 250% of payroll and allowed rent and lease payments to be a part of what a forgivable expense would be, because we didn't want to see that contagion into the real estate sector and into the landlords. But that's not enough. You're absolutely right. I mean, I'm hearing from people that run, whether it's a little strip mall or big commercial entities, that even their big name clients are calling and saying, we're not paying this month. And they're panicking over that. You can just imagine. So you're absolutely right. That is an issue that's going to have to be confronted here. What we did a couple of weeks ago was an emergency sort of move to deal with the crisis in front of us. But I believe Congress is going to have to go back in some way, shape, or form and address additional things that have emerged since then. That includes, by the way, replenishing the funds on the small business loan program, because I believe that those funds, given the demand, will not reach June 30th.
Senator, and that's where I wanted to go with you, which is to say, if we do need more, and if this does get extended, not necessarily that we're all going to be confined at home, but if in fact we go back to a sort of normal, we go back to work, but we're wearing masks and gloves and we go to work, but invariably I imagine we go pretty much straight home. We're not getting on airplanes. We're not bellying up to the bar and doing the things that we normally would do. All of those businesses are still gonna struggle. And if that goes on through the summer and into even any time into the fall, you could see the economic carnage that it could create. So my question is, what do you think the appetite is in Washington? What do you think the timing would be to turn on an additional spigot? What would that spigot look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think we have to divide it into two things. First, let me just say the appetite is there. I think everyone I've talked to in the Senate recognizes we're going to have to go back and do more, and probably more than once. So I would say, number one is we're in the emergency response phase. Is there more we need to do to add on to what we did the last time? And you've seen people talk about that. And I think that's almost a definite yes. Then there's the recovery phase of it. And you can't get to the recovery phase until you have a full damage assessment. But I think before we get to the recovery phase on things like infrastructure and so forth, there's going to have to be work done on that first phase, which is plussing up whatever we've done already and maybe some additional things that we might have missed because we had to move so quickly. I think that the bigger challenge is logistical, and that is how do you get over 500 members of Congress back to Washington to take a vote in the House and Senate? It would almost have to be structured as something that's voted on unanimously in both chambers, because I think it's going to be very difficult logistically to move and get everybody back there, especially given the uptick in the infection rate in the D.C. area.
That was my question, Senator. Now that you have so many senators and representatives who have gone back to their district, could it even be possible, or do you think there's going to be the need for some sort of emergency measures to allow people to vote remotely?
Well, let me say that you can pass things in the Senate with only two people there, somebody presiding and someone making a motion on unanimous consent for passage of a law. And you could do it. If you wanted to go back and just add more money, you could pretty quickly do that with two people there. The House has similar procedures. The question becomes, in the Senate, if one single senator objects, that becomes impossible. So you would have to rely on all 100 senators to be cooperative. And that's not something I can guarantee because we have a unique cast of characters across the 100 people. But you would hope that there would be, because there probably is the only alternative we would have to making this happen. The other question is whether within the funds that were authorized, there are funds that are, for example, you're spending less than one part of the spending because you over anticipated it. And so you're able to move monies over. There's enough executive discretion to repurpose funds to something else. For example, theoretically, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but theoretically, the more people are on payroll because of the PPP, the less people are on unemployment. But again, that's theoretical right now. We have to get the program to work.
Senator, another question for you, which is, at some point, states and governors are going to have to make some decisions about reopening. And you're hearing some governors more ambitious or aggressive about reopening than others. Do you think that this should be mandated by the states, or do you think this should be mandated by the federal government, in large part because one of the questions becomes the ability to reinfect? And if travel is open and we do live in an open society, what that ultimately means. We've seen some governors obviously be very fast off the mark, others much slower, including in your own state. And I'm curious where you land on that issue.
Let me say this. If we knew in mid-January, if everybody knew in mid-January what the world would look like on April 6th, I think everyone would have reacted differently to that. And I think every country in the world, for the most part, has faced the same dilemma because people in public office don't want to inconvenience people and don't want to shut down economies. So I think the number one, we can't change that. We have to learn from it. People have to be held accountable for it, but we can't change it. What would be unforgivable at this point is to make that mistake again and have a second wave of infection. And so the key to answering your question is, do we have a system in place to rapidly test people, isolate those who are sick, quarantine those who came in contact with the contact tracing? Have we built up our capacity so that our hospitals don't get easily overwhelmed? And have we developed therapeutics, antivirals, that can keep someone off a ventilator or even keep someone out of ICU? Those are the three things that we need to be working on right now, even as we are dealing with the crisis before us. Or we will have a second wave, like you've just outlined. I also think that your question about regional versus national, I think the most important thing the national government can do, the federal government can do, is provide broad and strong guidance and then allow the states to implement them as opposed to trying to enforce them across all 50 states. Because I do think this is the kind of thing where openings are going to be some ways geographically based. But here's the one thing that's pretty clear. We are not going to just say, go back to the way things were on March 1st immediately. It's not going to work that way. Even after we reopen, I think you're still going to see the 6-foot distancing with the little lines on the ground that you now see at CVS or Walgreens or Rite Aid and so forth across the country. And I still think you're going to see restrictions on large gatherings for the foreseeable future. So we're going to go back to something. I don't think it's going to be to business as usual. I think we're going to gradually build towards that. And until we have a vaccine, may never get fully to that.